Hi, and welcome to Tom Kennedy Science, and I'm your host, Dr. Tom Kennedy. So in this video lecture, I'm talking about viruses today. Yeah, they've been in the news a lot lately. And if you hear a little peeping in the background, that's my daughter and wife back there having a fantastic time in the other room playing, so that might bleed through a little bit, and that's okay. But viruses, these things take over our cells. They affect pop culture and mythology. They've even altered the course of our evolution. In fact, we wouldn't be here today as we know ourselves without viruses. Wait, I know, isn't that weird? Let's find out what I mean by that. But first of all, what exactly is a virus? These things are like on the edge of life. Really, a virus is a protein capsule with some genetic material inside of it. And some viruses actually have membranes. Now, they don't make the membranes, they get them from their host. Now, there's a debate. Are viruses living or are they not living? And the camp that says they are living says, well, they reproduce and they evolve. Well, lots of things can reproduce, like fire, and well, they just are copying their genetic information. So if you get a computer virus and it gets copied and sent to your neighbors and other people in your classes or whoever is on your list, is that really living? So I don't really buy that. And evolving, well, yeah, things evolve over time. It doesn't have to be, they do evolve through natural selection. So some people do say that viruses are living. I'm in the camp that says, for the most part, viruses are not living. And here's why I say this. First of all, there's no metabolism. They're not using energy to create order. And for me, that's a very important process that life does. It has this whole metabolic system to extract energy from the environment and use that energy to create order and maintain homeostasis. And secondly, viruses, although they reproduce, they have to basically hijack another cell to do that by inserting in their genetic material, something we're going to talk about. But they don't reproduce by cellular division. They're not cells. Cells are the basic unit of life. And that's one thing that I do agree with many textbooks and other people, that cells are the basic unit of life and that they reproduce by some type of cell division. Viruses don't do that. So in my opinion, you can feel free to disagree with me. I do not consider viruses to be living. Now, just because viruses are not living doesn't mean they're boring or uninteresting. So viruses are what they are. They're these protein codes, and they have these spikes on them, these proteins, and these proteins allow them to attach to other types of cells. So some viruses are specific to the species they attack, and not only are they specific to the species, they are specific to very certain proteins on certain types of cells. Now, granted, some viruses can affect many different types of animals. And the reason why is, as animals, we have shared common ancestry. We share proteins in common. So if a virus attacks a common protein, you can attack many different species like a rabies virus. So for example, HIV, this is the virus that causes AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. It has specific proteins that attack helper T cells. That's part of your immune system. HIV basically takes out your immune system. It's pretty wild. Not in the news these days, but 6 years ago, Ebola virus was going rampant in parts of Africa. Ebola is easily spread through bodily fluids. If you sneeze on somebody, bad news. And these attack the endothelial layers of your body. So they attack your liver, they attack your intestines, your stomach. It's bad news. And Ebola has a very high rate of mortality, like 50, 60, 70% or even higher compared to less than 5% of the coronavirus. And then, of course, the coronavirus. Now, the coronavirus is actually a name given to a group of viruses, including things like SARS, MERS, even some of the ones that cause a common cold. Now, COVID-19 is a type of coronavirus, and it gets its name from corona, which is the CO, virus, VI, disease. So COVID, and the 19 comes from the year it was first discovered. And this particular virus has a unique spike protein that makes it very easy for this virus, which is transmitted through the air, to latch on to specific proteins in your respiratory system and especially your lungs. So this is one of the more contagious viruses out there, and it's also pretty deadly. Now, interestingly, viruses, they're not replicating through cell division, but what they do replicate is their genetic information. And viruses can store that genetic information as DNA or RNA. Isn't that wild? I mean, we store all of our genetic information as DNA because it's stable. RNA viruses, they can actually mutate really quickly. Coronavirus, RNA virus, lots of variants. It's because RNA can rapidly mutate faster than DNA. And a DNA virus, when they attack a cell, they latch onto a specific surface protein, insert their DNA into the cell. Now, interestingly, their DNA's evolved ways to bypass the gatekeepers of the nuclear pores, get into the cell nucleus, and start doing transcription from inside the cell nucleus, and then replicate itself using stuff that's already inside the eukaryotic cell. So they're kind of taking over the machinery of the cell. The other one is the RNA virus. Now, RNA viruses, they can have their replication occur right in the cytoplasm of the cell. And in fact, some types of RNA viruses, once their RNA is inside the cytoplasm, it acts as messenger RNA. Translation immediately begins. They're taking over the cell to make viral proteins almost immediately. And then some of them, they do some other interesting things. One is called a retrovirus. And a retrovirus has a protein called reverse transcriptase. Reverse, going backwards, transcription, ACE, enzyme. It's a protein enzyme. We know that transcription is copying the genetic information in DNA into messenger RNA. That's what RNA polymerase does. So if I've got a reverse transcriptase, RNA viruses make DNA from their RNA. The process is backwards. And then sometimes that DNA can be inserted into the host genome. And then when that host replicates, it replicates that viral DNA as well. Interesting. So there's some connections here with these retroviruses. Did you know that like between 5 and 8% of your genome is of viral origin, right? So these retroviruses have gone through our ancestors and have inserted their genes into us. So you're like at least 5% viral DNA. That's like 150 million base pairs of your DNA is of viral origin. What is it doing in there? Well, interestingly, viral proteins may have sparked some evolutionary trends in mammals. Now there's a thing called a eutherian. Theria means beast, eu means new. So eutherians are new beasts. Most mammals that you're aware of are new beasts. The only ones that aren't are like platypus and echidnas and your marsupials. The rest of us are eutherians. So like horses and cats and dogs and bunny rabbits and rodents. We're all eutherians. Now, one thing that eutherians do is we reproduce when we have live birth. And as our growing embryo is inside the mom, it connects with the placenta. And there's these proteins called synectin that actually connects the placenta to the endometrium of the uterus. Now, endo just means within. The endometrium is the lining inside the uterus that the placenta connects to. And this protein called synectin is actually important in making those connections. Turns out the synectin is of viral origin. Think about that, right? The entire evolution of live-bearing mammals was influenced strongly by a viral infection that gave us a necessary protein to form the placenta. Wow, who would have thought? So there's our connection. Viruses affecting evolution. Now, we kind of hit around this a little bit, but let me just talk about these life cycles quickly. There's two types, lytic and lysogenic. So an lytic life cycle, basically it's like an RNA virus will insert its RNA into a cell. It can also be a DNA virus as well, and will immediately begin making copies of the virus, and then the virus will bust out of the cell and go and infect other cells. And the lytic life cycle usually kills the host cell. In a lysogenic life cycle, the virus gets its RNA or DNA into the host cell. If it's RNA, it'll reverse transcribe DNA, then that DNA will go get into the genome of the host. So every time the host replicates, it replicates the viral DNA as well. And then there could be some environmental cue later on, and all the offspring that have that viral DNA inserted into it, it can go from a lysogenic to a lytic life cycle, and then you can all of a sudden start making viruses, and you've never were infected primarily by a virus. You inherited it from your parents or your grandparents are going further back. Now, granted, this can't last for very long because over time you'd get some mutations that would eventually render those viruses useless. So don't worry, even though we are 5 to 8% viral in our genome, most of those viruses probably could never become active. Now, just for fun, rabies and zombies. Rabies is a type of virus that affects many different mammals and affects our central nervous system. It makes us go crazy. And if you've noticed, there's a lot of movies out there about zombies and zombie apocalypses and zombie response crews. Well, it turns out that the mythos, the mythology of zombies probably comes from rabies, because rabies kind of like makes people act weird and hallucinate. And well, one of the ways that rabies is transmitted is through saliva. Why do you become a zombie? You get bit by a zombie. How do you catch rabies? You get bit by a rabid animal. So it's kind of interesting that the mythos of zombies almost certainly came from rabies. Okay, well, that is how viruses now affect even our pop culture. Okay, well, this has been another episode of Tom Kennedy Science. Hope you enjoyed it.